Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
On Scott County Delivers topic, transportation, one of my favorite topics. Leslie, take it away.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, before we get to that, I do want to take one moment here to acknowledge Judith Brumfield. She's sitting in her last Scott Delivers today. Her official retirement is on September 30th. She never did come to the board when she retired as the HHS director, so I'm going to put her on the spot for a minute. You saw a lot of history of the past 10 years, and Gary really also had, when he talked about the culture, the delivering what matters, he really challenged his leaders at that time, Judith and myself and Kevin, to focus on data and outcomes and where we were headed, not just outputs, and he mentioned that earlier. And that tagline of delivering what matters that Lisa came up with after a lot of brainstorming and discussion, and the priority-based budgeting, which went on a little hold here for a while, but is back up. The Scott Delivers and our process improvements that we're continually looking at. And the strategic plan that you've seen now updated every 3 years with a focus on some strategies and some tactics. And you saw today mental health, a huge lift over the last couple of years. And the early literacy and some of the areas of technology that have been so important. I really think Judith played an extremely important role in the education of our staff and her drive towards continuous improvement and data. Scott Delivers is a big part because of her and her desire to have transparency in front of the board and in front of the public, the things we do well, but also the things we need to get better at and drive forward. And so I just wanted to take a second and have us acknowledge her here today before she retires on the 30th, and thank her for all the work she's done in continual process improvement and where we're headed as an organization. So, thank you. Would you like to say anything?
I will take a minute. Only a minute, I promise. My retirement, I've had a very, very long career in public service, a lot longer than my husband would have liked, to the point that it's become a family joke of will I ever really leave. But I am. I'm leaving. I'm leaving with really wanting to say thank you. Thank you to Scott County for allowing me to be here to do things that I think are really, really important. And just to point out that the last 5 years I had the opportunity to really meet with staff from every single area of the county, talk to them about what they do, why it's important to them, what their passion is about it, and how they know whether or not they're really making a difference with what they do. I wouldn't say everybody was always really anxious to have those meetings, but they did. They really, really invested in beginning to be able to say why what they do is important and how they know that they're really making a difference for the citizens of Scott County, and I know we are. What I left from that with is a recognition of what dedicated employees we have here in Scott County, how much they really, really care about the service they do, and really made me think about what am I going to miss most next month when I don't come into the office. And it really is a culture. It's a smile I get every time I walk in, every time I ask for help. It is that quality of we really care about what we do. We really care about providing the highest level of service, and we really ought to be very, very proud of that. And I hope this board recognizes what an asset the employees are to Scott County. Thank you.
Well, with that, we're going to get to everybody's favorite topic, right? Transportation, we're all engineers, and how they support safety, mobility, and our economic development. The last time they were here, I think we were talking about asset management and where we're headed with there. But with that, you guys are going to get about 5 minutes to kind of intro what you're going to talk about today, and then we're going to open it up to the panel for questions, the audience for questions, and then we'll turn it over to the board. And with that, I'm Leslie Vermillion. I'm the Deputy County Administrator.
I'm Chris Harder. I'm the new Quality Improvement Manager.
Lisa Koner, Public Affairs.
Pam Selvig, Health and Human Services Director.
Tony Winnicky, County Engineer.
Alan Herman, SmartLink Mobility Management.
Sang Tong Van, City of Savage.
Chris Delwell with the Shakopee Police Department.
Brad Davis, County Planning Manager.
Craig Jensen, Transportation Planning Manager.
Mark Callahan, Traffic Engineer.
All right, Tony.
I will kick this thing off here, and I also want to thank Judith because she's challenged us the last couple of years in several different areas, and our group was the very first group when this thing started. And Judith and Leslie said, I think we'll start with our traffic group. So here you go, there's the table, and have at it, we'll just fire questions at you, right? So that was several years back, so here we are. So today's topic is community design, and in particular transportation corridors and land use. And we've got members from our Community Services Division, our Transportation Services Division, and we've got a few partners that we work with on a regular basis as well. Sang is the city engineer, and Chris Captain with Shakopee Police, and so they're a welcome addition to this group because a lot of what we do, they have some influence and impact in this, and so they'll interject where need be. So we're going to focus on 3 outcomes today. That's safe, healthy, and livable. And as a collective group, our planning and design and implementation of our programs surely do lead to a safe, healthy, and livable community. Different levels of government all study and develop transportation plans and different levels of planning efforts. So it's really important that we bring these planning efforts back together to support compatible land use and help with transportation decisions. So our corridor studies are funded through our 10-year transportation improvement program and do provide the long-term vision for each corridor that's adopted by the state, the region, the county, and local areas of government that make decisions in a coordinated fashion. And the goal of these studies is to make responsible and cost-effective investments through compatible land uses along our arterial roadways, our principal and minor arterial roadways, provide connected, supporting local road networks, provide predictable and safe trips for vehicles, provide connected and safe crossings for our pedestrians and bicyclists. It contributes to economic vibrancy and provides linked transit with housing, shopping, and employment. After these studies are completed, our corridors and intersections are then evaluated for improvements consistent with the county's transportation plan. Projects are then selected based on these studies for construction based on system needs, safety, traffic management, expansion, and multimodal connections through an annual solicitation. And Sang was part of our annual solicitation, and we'll get into one particular corridor at some point here in which we were able to kind of both package our needs together and recommend a project for our program. So that worked out quite well. Pavement preservation and major maintenance activities are also a component of the TIP and are prioritized over expansion or management type projects. During construction process, the county does invest considerable amount of time and money towards work zone safety for our employees, the contractors, and the motoring public. And decisions in regards to this, there's a lot of things that are taken into consideration, whether we're going to close the roadway or we're going to construct this project under traffic. So a lot goes into that, and we do consider the local access needs and economic purposes with the residents. So once constructed, our corridors are managed and operated for overall outcomes. For example, our pavements are managed to a certain pavement quality and expectation that the county board has established. The public is surveyed every 2 or 3 years, and we get a satisfaction rating back from the public, whether that's how well we're maintaining our roadways from a rideability standpoint, or how quickly we're removing snow and getting back down to black pavement after an event. After a project is completed, then it's monitored for its effectiveness and really looked at, did we accomplish the goals that we set out to with that project? Did that roundabout in a rural area, did that really reduce the number of crashes that we expected? The partial interchange that we put in at 17 and 42, we had several fatalities and serious injury crashes. Did it reduce the severity of crashes at that particular intersection with that investment? The access improvements and expansions that we made on County Road 42 and on 17, are we seeing the benefits on those particular corridors? So this data is really used to help make decisions for future projects as well as monitor the effectiveness of past investments. So for today, Our group selected some key performance indicators and supporting measures related to safety measures, mobility measures, and economic development that support our transportation corridors and land use. And with that, I'll turn it back to Leslie.
All right, folks, and questions?
Well, I'll start us out. I'm not sure who this question would really go to. I'm going to go to page 5. This was the first thing that kind of struck me. It was a fairly long list of things that are perhaps not working. And the area that kind of struck me was around factors inhibiting joint work and effective transportation systems. And there's a lot of reference in those bullet points around political pressures, goals not being aligned, or goals being altered. I was just kind of wondering if someone could talk more about that, more specifically, kind of what kind of things do you do to mitigate those concerns? Or
Sure. So, without question, the understanding of our transportation system and land uses they really support each other is critically important. And oftentimes, we're going in and retrofitting, if you will, which becomes very difficult. So, we've got roadway systems that are, a lot of them have been gravel roads out here before, what they are today. So building towards that understanding of what that hierarchy of roadway is, okay, is really important. And we do that on a regular basis. We have an elected officials event. This year it was in Prior Lake. And so to really help with that education piece, because too often we are retrofitting, and that, a lot of people are concerned about, their one little area. Well, just fix this intersection and we're fine. Yet it's the same people that complain about the next intersection down the road. So, but if you looked at how these systems are connected, both from a primary roadway, from a supporting road network, they all help each other. And so a lot of it is that education piece. And so taking advantage of, every project that we have, let alone on a bigger level, roadshow type level, on a project level. Every time we have an open house, there's an opportunity to help educate, whether it's officials, whether it's the public, because a lot of officials are hearing from the public, and just fix my little spot, right?
Yep.
And so the education is foremost number one. So, we're trying to do that every chance we get, both with our board and other elected officials.
I have a follow-up to that, if I might, because one of the questions that I had here is the misalignment of priorities that you noticed here, local project support, and I'm assuming that you mean both at a governmental as well as a population level, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a loaded question, and I apologize, because when I started here 22 years ago, in my naivete, I was a little surprised at the level of misalignment of priorities, shall we say, between local governments in terms of land use and transportation planning. And perhaps it's because there's a new way of doing things, or regional planning has really come to the forefront. It seems to me, particularly we've got some partners here at the table, that rancor seems to have diminished somewhat over the last couple of decades. Am I misinterpreting that in my Pollyanna rose-colored glasses? Or is there really been kind of an improvement in the relationships and in understanding how important it is to coordinate and cooperate so that we can all serve the public?
I would sure like to believe that we've made a lot of advancements in, understanding and the importance of the different levels of roadway and their functionality and classification, what they're all intended to do, and that coordination. So I surely like to think, and there's just so much more data out there, that really supports, what is the intended function of all of these roadways and how they connect together. So I do think that's there, but it's the follow through, because there are political pressures, in all of this, especially when you're going in. It's a little easier when you're out in a rural area. Well, even that's a little difficult, because it's like, why do you need to preserve this now? Well, because in 20 years, 30 years, this isn't going to look like it is now.
Right. There just seems to be a greater understanding about the intersectionality of land use, transportation, and all of these different systemic pieces that fit together.
There's definitely a higher level of understanding now. It's the follow through and implementation of what you know is right.
There's the rub. Speaking of intersectionality.
So Lisa, before you leave that, I was just going to add something there, Tony. I think we often hear about some of the negative ones, the ones that become a hot button because of one development or one access. But when you think about all of them that have gotten done with the corridor studies that go through and don't become a controversy, and you think about a 13 corridor study and a 169 corridor study and a Marshall Road corridor study and the 42, and all of those pieces that do come into play because of the good planning, I would say those are in the minority as well.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I'm hoping we'll hit on some of those corridors because there's some great lessons learned and how we moved forward, you know, in great part because of the studies that we've done. So.
And I think there's been a lot of more communication between the cities and the counties in the last 20 years that I've been here. I've worked hard to try to get involved with development review and when development pressure was hitting after the Shakopee bypass opened. I mean, it was a learning curve for everyone. And I think, you know, we've worked hard to get at least the three larger cities to get involved with their regular development review committees, getting involved at the table with them, talking to staff, working through the development issues. So I think we've come a long way since then, and I've been here for coming up on 20 years, so I've seen that growth where when 20 years ago we weren't communicating as much as we do today. So and the form of communication is different too. So.
I attribute the success to the scale. I think through scale at a staff level, we meet regularly, monthly, to talk about land use transportation issues among staff. And as Tony mentioned, every year we do a new training for elected officials, and we hit this topic for about a couple of hours. So I think that's helpful, just build that understanding, and then that regular communication.
That was not a plant, by the way, even though I serve on the marketing committee for scale. Thank you.
Just from a city perspective too as well, we're seeing more and more communication-wise with the county. I know Tony and I try to meet on a monthly basis to try to go through some of these mutual projects, and you get some of the larger ones like 42 and 13 that are going on within the city limits. Of course, our focus is always our city, unfortunately or fortunately for us, I guess, and I think we're a little bit in that point. But we do, you know, from a future planning standpoint as well, we appreciate the county kind of going through that tip and providing us the planning tools we need to get it into our CIP as well. And so that's been, I think, a lot better in terms of getting that future needs. You know, the longer time frame we have, the better, I guess, in some of these larger projects. I think we're going to, and Tony mentioned one that's going to come up here, but, you know, as long as we have that time frame to get those ready, you know, the cities are on board as well.
Go ahead, Lisa, you had another question.
I just, you know, in terms of, you know, we were talking about the intersectionality and the cooperation and the kind of the higher level thinking about how these things work together. I was intrigued by the factors inhibiting joint work here. You mentioned public health inputs into community land use and decision making. Is it that they have not been involved, or that they have not been involved early enough, or we haven't identified the right touch points for them to become involved? Or what is that factor? I mean, what are all the tentacles to that factor, so to speak?
I'll hit on one, and then maybe Brad or Craig can jump in. But one that immediately comes to mind is our trails and the number of. And so, you know, working with our partners in that regard, we do have one slide in here, one performance measure in regards to that. How, you know, we've had an increase in the number of trails, and that was a very concerted effort starting in 08 or 9, somewhere in there. Of having trails on both sides of our roadway or sidewalk. Right. And so a very concerted effort, and using the opportunity both for projects to put those in, you know, or through development as well. So that's, you know, relatively new, but we've made some pretty good strides in that area. So Brad has any other comments?
You know, in the development review process, there's a lot more attention now to how development not only serves the car, but also the pedestrian and the transit services. So looking at layouts of buildings differently, and the distance between a transit stop and the front door, and what sidewalk connections internally in the development are going to be made available. So I'm hearing a lot of staff in the cities and the county talk more about that kind of aspect of this topic, and thinking about people a little bit more than just cars.
Tony, could we move into it sounds like you have some things you want to share about just your evaluation and lessons learned. And so like on page 25, the data starts kind of looking at those crash rates before and after some of the construction projects. So I guess first I want to just give you the chance, is there one that you specifically want to talk about? Otherwise, I have a couple questions.
You can dive right in. So we did select 4 different types of projects. One is a roundabout, this first one. We've got a partial interchange, we've got a segment, and then we've got a mini roundabout. So 4 different types of projects and what some success and some tracking has gone on to date.
Okay.
And we'd gladly talk about any of them. So
Okay.
go right ahead.
I'm wondering, like, I mean, just from a visual, the first 2, like page 25 and 26, clearly show some reductions in the crash rate. So what are the lessons learned there in terms of the successes? And then,
Sure. So the first one is frankly, was the first rural roundabout in the state of Minnesota, at Trunk Highway 13 and 2, and several injury crashes there. And so, you know, it was kind of a bold decision to put in a roundabout. You've got a trucking corridor on Trunk Highway 13, so you got a very mobile corridor, as ours is as well on County Road 2. And so it was a little bit of a engineering calculated risk. How's this gonna really operate? And so that particular intersection was averaging over 7 crashes a year. And so kind of quickly, if you look at these charts, the purple line represents the severity of crashes and its severity rate, and then the blue line is the crash rate. So anytime you see the separation like you do there, it's a higher severity crashes that are happening out there. And so as a general number, we were averaging 7 crashes a year out there.
Did you say 70?
70.
70.
Yeah,
Oh,
70.
my.
No, I'm sorry, I meant 7. Sorry.
Okay, it's like my heart just stopped.
7. But still, when you look at the severity rate, it was, you know, quite concerning. And then you look at the post condition, and it's, you know, a flat line more or less. You know, it's 1 crash, and they're generally property damage type level. So looking at that next one, that interchange, and this one in particular is, in my mind, one of our most successful projects from a safety standpoint that we've built in the county. The BC ratio was off the charts, like 60-1, because we had a few fatalities out there, we had several injury crashes out there, and the design of that, we effectively eliminated the movement in which the vast majority, including the 3 fatalities, were eliminated. So we grade separated those cars from making those movements. And so we effectively got rid of that. And that one is maintained to be, you know, a really, it's operating extremely well. We've got a project in our tip right now that will, from that point to the east, will continue expanding 42. It's the last segment on the County Road 42 roadway. So there'll be a little cleanup with that intersection. So even some of the minor crashes we're seeing right now are in that area that will frankly clean up with that particular project, and that's in 2020.
okay.
So let's get to that next one then.
Shall we?
Yes.
Okay.
So this one, and I did put this in here in particular because, you know, we really, again, took really kind of an engineering calculated risk in this project here. So this is a mini roundabout, and I'm sure, you know, most everybody has driven through this intersection to see how it operates, and Chris is going to jump in here in just a little bit to give us the city's perspective, especially from a law enforcement abiding standpoint. But, you know, when we went through this is the first one in the state. So it was kind of, are we doing the right thing here? You know, by all accounts, every analysis that we did, and most can remember the congestion that we had there. At 4:30 in the afternoon, you waited over 5 minutes to get through that intersection. So congestion was really high. We did have, in the few years before that, we had 2 bicycle accidents and 1 pedestrian accident at that intersection. So in deciding to go with this form of intersection control as an always stop, the biggest understanding through people is it's going to be crazy. There's people driving all over the place. It's going to be dangerous. The hard thing to sell was, but there's really, with the roundabout, there's really not going to be that traffic. It's going to be gone. In the peak PM, you might have a 3 or 4 vehicle rolling queue going through there, but the vast majority of the day when you pull up there, you know, there's not other vehicles there because before you had 6 lanes of traffic stop there. There's a 4-lane roadway east-west on the city street and then our roadway. So oftentimes during peak periods, there were 6 cars waiting there, everybody looking, hey, who's next? So moving forward with this, you know, it shows that we have had some crashes, albeit very predominantly property damage crashes, but, you know, we're 4 years in. We opened this thing in June of 2014, and we're 4 years in, and we've had some crashes there, all being property damage crashes. The congestion, I think, good decision. I think we need to continue to monitor this particular intersection. There are several others that are in place right now around the state, and there are several others that are in design. It's just a little bit different, and I'm gonna let Chris kind of talk about what he sees, and I think him and I look at it the same as far as how people react to it, because it is different than a traditional size roundabout, so why don't you give us your 2 cents on what you're seeing out there?
Yes, the roundabout is definitely a frequent source of concern from the community, despite several educational efforts we've had over the years. When it was put in, the concept of roundabouts was fairly new, let alone a smaller diameter, a tighter one. But since that has dissipated, we would have liked to have seen better flow there. It's definitely, I agree, it definitely moves traffic. We've added some yield signs. We've had public service on infomercial type things, and it appears that speed is probably our Achilles heel there. There isn't enough room for the driver to react to what the person on the left is doing, and when they come in too fast, there's just not enough time for them to react, and that, I think, is what leads to our accidents, and I don't know how we fix that. So the education part is ongoing. We've tried the enforcement edge as well.
So Chris or Mark or Tony, what is the common, I mean, I go through there probably 6 times a day when it's the Senate West and living on the other side, but there's definitely no delay. I mean, you used to sit at 10th Avenue and it was frustrating, or you'd go over to Old 77 or something. Is it a side swipe? Is it a rear end? What is it that you're seeing there that is the?
Yeah, most often in a roundabout, typical to this one, it is the side swipe and the rear end. You know, to Chris's point, regular roundabout, you're simply looking to the left to find that gap, whereas here, you've got 3 or 4 vehicles that are moving in there, and they're all in close proximity, so you're kind of taking inventory of everything going on. And I think for some people, it's just a little more confusing than a traditional size. So, I mean, this was really part of a nationwide pilot project, and being the first one in Minnesota. And so I think there's some lessons learned, and, you know, now you kind of have lots of different sizes between what's going on here, more of a traditional size, and it's exactly half the size of a traditional size roundabout. So there's definitely some lessons learned. You know, relatively cheap, you know, compared to a traditional size. It stays within the right of way, really inside about the footprint of the roadway. So there's some, in the right location, you know, I think it can be a very useful form of intersection control.
How long would you take to evaluate this from this point, from 2004 onwards, before you say this is not a successful experiment, or it's trending in the right direction, or maybe we need to look at modifications?
Yeah, we haven't talked about, you know, exactly what that is, because in a lot of roundabouts, I mean, I drive through a big, huge 2-lane roundabout in Lakeville, you know, at least twice a day. And the first couple months, first couple years,
Yeah.
there's still quite a few crashes, and a little bit different, trying to understand how to operate that, just like this. And now they're seeing, you know, those trends going down, and it's been several years now. But no question, we'll keep working with the city of Shakopee and their engineering group as well to kind of, you know, see where that's trending and are there particular movements or what's going on with that. It is the first roundabout of any type in Shakopee. So I would like to think, and it's not really a through traffic, or it is a very local intersection. It's not people coming up from New Prague that may be going through this intersection. I have to believe it's predominantly, you know, 90+% of the same people that drive through it on a regular basis. So I would like to think there's some familiarity as time goes on.
Can we talk about, as long as we're talking about specific roads, I'm interested in slide 34, County Road 42. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I debated whether even to ask anything, because I know there's so much planned there. I think what struck me about the slide 34 is that whole kind of projected speed and moving traffic along. And as I look at this, by 2020, which some of those improvements will be done, we're still, there isn't a section of that corridor that's planned to be at speed.
Right, yeah. So there's a few things kind of going on with Explain, and Craig's gonna take the first shot at it here, I'll jump
Okay.
in. Yep,
So in the 96 corridor study, that's represented by the purple line there.
Yep.
And the kind of the dash line was what it was predicted to be in 2020, in 1996. So you can kind of see, even though that we have
Oh, okay.
other ways of collecting the data now than what they had done before, but you know, we're doing better in some places here than what they were predicting, so.
These are predictions without any
Im-
modification.
Okay.
Without any improvements.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
so if you look at the 2015
Okay.
and 18,
Yeah, they look
it's
good.
different data collection
Okay.
and how they're going about doing that. So it's almost like it's not quite a fair comparison.
Yeah, right.
So really what we need to do is we need to plan to update, you know, in 2019 next year, and then project out 20 years based on new data collection methods, so it's more apples to apples, because you're comparing a study, or, a study in 96 that projected out to 2020, and now we've got different modeling methods of how that happens, so.
Okay.
So we really need to update this, so to see if we are still on track with that target of 40 miles per hour target speed.
And Pam, it was really, when Tony talked about education, having been a part of that study, it was about the education. If we didn't follow through on our commitments and our planning, this
That's
is
where
what
we
the
would
region
have
was gonna
been.
face.
Okay.
It's like the
And so
worst
as we-
case
Scenario,
scenario.
okay.
As we talk about 42 from 83 to Marshall Road and putting access and those types of things in there, that's what starts to stem this down. And so as you looked at it, it was that planning, that we would then continue to measure this on an every couple of year basis, but it was a message of, if you don't think about this, if you don't coordinate your land use and your transportation, and I'll be honest, the biggest part of the 42 corridor study wasn't even 42 itself, it was the supporting roadways, and as Tony said, getting the local trips off of 42, which then caused more signals, more access points, and giving them alternative ways into that land. So it was as much about land use and supporting roads as it was 42.
That's helpful.
Can we go to slide 30, please? I'm just wondering if someone can speak to, are there targets or kind of best hopes for the development of turn lanes? Like, it was helpful to see just the numbers and the growth, but like, is there a target for what you'd like to see?
You know, I guess this is more of an inventory of what's happened. You kind of see through some of those years where it's been down with development,
Yep.
driven turn lanes here. Our target, ultimately, I'd like to see turn lanes at all public roads. I mean, that's our policy. We do have a lot of existing intersections throughout the county that don't have turn lanes.
Yep.
We see this as a safety improvement, and I think this is just monitoring kind of the turn lanes that have been installed, and,
Yep.
and it points out that we are installing, these turn lanes when we can through these developments.
Sure. Do you have an idea, just like I don't even know, like, are you happy with this growth? Is it a strong percentage of new development that are, or can you just give me like some evaluation of it?
It's really market driven.
Okay.
When development was downturned, we didn't get a lot of turn lanes. Now that it's picking up, we're getting more turn lanes here.
Okay.
Because people are building the roads and coming in with that. So I guess I don't know that there's a target
Okay.
now for.
Is there a sense on the percentage of roads? That's, because I had actually a very similar kind of question.
So it is our policy through development or our projects as well to install turn lanes at all the public streets. And no question, it's a safety improvement. There's been a lot of studies done and kind of quoted some crash reductions that you can kind of expect. And really these crash studies can be broken down between urban, rural type of roadways at a 2-lane, terrain, whatever that is. So there's lots of different types of studies. But from a safety standpoint, we've really taken a system-wide approach to what we do. So expectation on our roadways is that there's turn lanes there. You're effectively taking those vehicles out of the stream of traffic, whether that's a right turn, whether that's a left turn, you know, from rear end crashes, things of that nature. So, plus it's also a mobility improvement. I mean, you are again taking that out of the stream of traffic so, you know, people can continue on their way without being interrupted. I have to believe that this is very much a contributing factor to the big roll-up of KPI, our key performance indicator that has a number of crashes in our system overall. This is just a piece of that that says, you know, it's not to say that there was any, you know, an abundance of crashes at any one particular intersection, but a system-wide approach, we're gonna see a reduction in crashes, and we really have, our overall crashes. So this particular key performance indicator, and this really is a roll-up of lots of different performance measures that are going on, and you can see that we are really trending down in the right direction. We've had more vehicle miles driven in the last 5 years, yet we've had, you know, far less crashes in the last 5 years as well, and this is just one component of that. So I think, I don't know if I'll be quoted right here, but to the tune of somewhere, you know, during this development period, like $10 million of improvements that would really be a hit on our transportation improvement program, yet building these in through developments alone is a big improvement.
Nice.
I think the county's been proactive in identifying where turn lanes will be needed. We've worked with the townships in the rural parts of the county to look at where future roads would be needed to serve future rural lot development. Where those roads intersect county or state highways, we've identified the need for a turn lane. And then the issue becomes who builds the turn lane, and that's been a debate we've had with some of our developers who feel like they don't have a big enough project to carry the cost of building the turn lanes. So we've been spending time talking to the townships about different ways to fund turn lane improvements. The county has received some grant money to do some retrofits. So there's been a lot of different elements I think we've done in the last 2-3 years to really heighten the awareness and importance of turn lanes and get our development community kind of on board with this need as they develop, make sure that we get turn lanes installed.
Nice.
So I'm gonna use this opportunity to bring up a project with the city of Savage, since we're
Okay.
talking about turn lanes. So there's a development that's happening on our county highway 16.
Yes.
And of course, we're gonna require turn lanes for that. And then really through our solicitation for projects in our tip, Seng identified several things in that for improvement on that particular roadway, and we really package that up. We've got a drainage issue, we've got lack of trails, we got some development that we need turn lanes at one that's being built, some existing intersections as well. So from an overall safety standpoint, we kind of package that up, you know, into a project, and that's in our program for 2024 right now, proposed.
Nice. Nice. So it sounds like it's developing in a way that you would hope it would, like you are moving in the right direction.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
County Road 17, just one thing that kind of struck me on slide 32, and I don't know if you have thoughts, or is that looking at that access management piece, looking at in many areas showing some significant improvements around on that corridor around access management. But it looks like there's a couple of challenge points, if I read this right, particularly 101 to 16, that hasn't been able to been reduced at all. And I know there's a part of that that's under construction right now. So is there thoughts or plans to address that, or how do you use this data?
Yeah, so I'll take a shot at this thing first, Craig.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Tony, when you talk about it, will you address the Facebook post that was out there today regarding this segment of road? It was a complaint about 4 to 3 and why
Right.
the county did that back in 2001.
Right. So lots of different segments of roadway on this entire 17. And so we had a study in 2008 or 9 that was completed for 17/13 all the way down to New Prague. And really looked at, you know, what is this corridor going to function like, and really made the determination that it's a future principal arterial roadway. It runs right through the heart of the county, and we need to start managing it and building it out so it operates that way and so other roads that are supporting and coming into that roadway, that it really serves a very highly functional north-south roadway. So when you look at the opportunities to take care of some of these things, if we've got an immediate safety need, you know, like we had, you know, much more at 17 and 42, but that was part of the study, and that partial interchange came out of that study as well. But a lot of the cleanup that you see, and you pointed at, wow, some of them have really taken place, it's through projects, and that's probably the majority of our cleanup opportunity is through projects. So from the hospital, from County Road 16 south through 42, in that 1.5 to 2 mile segment, you can see how much, we cleaned up 41 private access points, 5 public streets. I mean, you know, I think extremely successful from an access management standpoint. You can hardly remember what that road used to look like as a 2-lane roadway now. And it's not to say that we simply just bought out all these houses and got rid of driveways. It's some combination of some of them. It's, you know, backage roads, it's making other connections. Same thing with the city streets. So great opportunity to do that. In the downtown area, we had the same opportunity in 2011, you know, from the downtown to 17, if you picture that.
Yeah.
And so we had an opportunity to clean up some access points, you know, and in that location as well, create a backage road. Then we've got some other areas that, you know, we don't have any projects going on there right now. One's being very rural on the south end, one being the 3-lane section that Leslie talked about. That was a 4-lane section turned into a 3-lane section. What year was that? It was
01, I think.
in 01, so quite some time ago. So we really do need to assess that from a capacity standpoint, from a safety standpoint, how we operate our signalized intersections. So that is an area, and you're right, you can see that, you know, we've had no cleanup in that particular area, and yet it carries, you know, a relatively high volume of traffic for a 3-lane section. So it is an area that we need to really assess, you know, how that's operating and where the safety is, and again, working with the city of Shakopee in that regard.
So Tony, what's the benefit with all those access points to a 3 versus a 4-lane undivided roadway? Why would we do that?
Yeah, it provides you, I mean, the 3-lane, it basically provides you a continuous center left turn lane, you know, through that area. And so, you know, while there's, you know, some benefit in that regard, it also creates some other safety issues, you know, with that as well. Because you have a single through lane, you know, in that area. And there's some confusion in there of, you know, when you have that many access points, am I going in front of this guy, behind that guy, where do I kind of slip in, you know, to make that happen? But there's, you know, there's somewhat limited right of way, you know, to widen that out to a complete, you know, like we're going to be doing on County Road 83 in 2021, you know, to a complete 4-lane with left and right turn lanes and all of that. We're pretty restricted in that area with the right of way that we own, and it would be a very expensive project. So nothing's in our program as far as right now, or 10 years out, to do anything in that area, but we will be assessing that.
Leslie, just to add on to that, I think one of the big advantages of the 3-lane section is, versus the 4, is you eliminate a lot of the traffic that wants to skip in between or jog in and out of the 2 lanes that they have in their direction. So you eliminate a lot of that side swipe possibility for crashes. Anybody that wants to make a left turn gets moved out of the traffic flow. They can wait for a gap in the opposite traffic to make their left turn. So I haven't studied this, but I would imagine there'd be a significant decrease in the amount of traffic crashes from side swipe maneuvers in a 3-lane section versus a 4-lane section.
My recollection, and I didn't come to 02, but was when they looked at the data in that 03-04 time period, maybe Craig can help me out, he would have been here at the same time, was we did see a reduction in rear end crashes. But I would guess the point of the volumes now is pushing the capacity of 2 lanes, is what we're hearing from the public, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we can look into further here, is how long are people waiting to make those lefts, and because you have that long stream of single lane traffic now.
Single lane, yeah, no gaps.
Yep.
But, you know, again, those 2 project areas, you know, great reduction there, again, adds to that overall number of crashes on our system. You know, that's another project that would add to that.
Got a question for you, Ellen.
Okay.
So page 42, transit links, Mark. There's a lot going on in this graph that I don't think I am interpreting correctly. The first thing, obviously, with just is that passengers per hour? Is that a PPH?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So, obviously, we're outpacing a lot of the other areas here, and that to me seems to be a good thing.
Yes.
Okay. What I'm confused about, though, is the length of the trip and how we are so spatially mismatched. Now, obviously, this is a function of, the way that our, organic growth from the Scott and Carver counties and where CI development happened and where people need to go. What I'm struggling with is this measure, if it stays this or goes higher, it's a reflection of demand, clearly, pent-up demand, but do we want it to drop? I mean, is this a measure of efficiency? Or, I'm not sure if that is a good thing or a bad thing. I know it's just a thing, it's an observation, but I don't know how to interpret it in the broader view.
Efficiency is what we're really looking for in this type of thing. Kind of comparing ourselves to our regional partners is one thing, but also there's many factors in there. Carver and Scott counties have very little fixed route. So a dial-a-ride in another area would actually just pick up a person from their door and take them to the nearest fixed route solution. We, on the other hand, don't have any fixed route to take them to. So thus the longer passenger trip that they have to make because there is nothing to transfer them to. So it measures both of those things, that we are different than the rest of the region. Hennepin County has a lot of fixed route. So they can pick a person up at their door as a dial-a-ride, but they might only travel a couple miles to the fixed route, and then they get onto the fixed route. So there's different things that are being factored in here. One is that we are, again, to the most rural counties in the region, and the other part is that we are also, because there is not much fixed route, dial-a-ride is also bigger in demand, because again, that's what's available to them also.
So ideally, in an ideal world, we would like to see that number decrease.
Possibly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, keep the passengers per hour up there,
Yep.
but decrease the amount of miles that the person is traveling.
Right, thank you.
I guess this would be for Alan too. Page 33, talk about SmartLink miles driven per accident. Let me just make sure I'm looking at that right. So this also, we've seen significant improvements and seems to be doing really, really well. So I guess kind of what do you attribute that to? And then just being a bit of a cynic, I just kind of wonder, this standard that the Met Council sets, is that just like way too low?
That's pretty bad.
We consider that also,
Okay.
but remember, what they deal with is also much more congested roads.
Okay, so that plays.
And they deal with many more vehicles on the road also.
Okay.
Metro mobility, this is, part of that standard is metro mobility in here.
Okay.
So for them, they have to kind of keep that bar
Okay.
a little low.
That makes more
To
sense.
make themselves at least somewhat accountable. But at the same time, again, we consider ourselves very good that,
Right.
between ourselves and the provider right now, doing a very good job of staying out of that.
Agree.
Do you know what contributes to that? Because even with the bar kind of artificially lowered for the other metro counties, what else contributes to that really strong?
Well, even experienced drivers. So for instance, a lot of times a more experienced driver will actually work for a fixed route system rather than a dial-a-ride. So, and it could be many factors also. Again, where they're located. So in other words, you're going to see, again, more congestion in a Hennepin County than in a Carver and Scott counties. So there are more fender benders or those types of things happening in those areas than here also.
So Alan, one of the things, if you could, Deb, go to like 39. So 38 shows transit up in 17, but the board made a decision last June to invest in evening and weekend.
Yes.
And so Could you talk a little bit about that? I didn't see it called out, what you're seeing there, riders, riders per hour, and what that's done with your denials from,
Sure. Basically, in 17, the board decided to increase or add even some peak services during the day, also some weekend and evening services that have basically were never available at that point. Over the course of 17, so it began in June of 17 and is active up to this date and so forth, we are seeing about 2.1 passengers per hour overall, which is very good for a startup, which is really what this is called. And it's been very steady. Not a lot of big jumps, but steady at that pace. What we're seeing is people, especially like on weekends and evenings, they're now able to get maybe home from work where they weren't able to before, or on the weekends, some ladies getting to church services, or again, employment. We're seeing Saturdays at a very good pace, Sundays down a little bit compared to Saturdays. So overall, that service has been very good and actually compares to Dial-A-Ride in the rest of the region. So their numbers a lot of times are in that 2 to 2.5 passengers per hour. This service, for being very new, is very good at this point in time.
so has it helped, do you think, with any of the denials midday or things like that, or?
Correct. Same thing. One of the slides is our denials by year. That's where that impact also of that expanded services, but then also we use our volunteer services to help with denial system. So both came into play at that same time in that 17 era. But again, as you can see, 18 is on same pace to basically knock down almost in half the number of denials that were in the system from in 16. So overall, a good combination of everything that's happened has led to people getting to where they wanted to get to.
I had just a question about the community indicator, and I know from my own experience in the HHS, the community indicators haven't always made sense or aligned really well with the KPIs and stuff, but I was just kind of curious about this in terms of, so it starts, it's for all of the transportation, starting on 18, it's identified as a community indicator, is the access to average jobs. So the average number of jobs within 30 minutes of public transit or walking. And I certainly get why Hennepin and Ramsey would look so different than perhaps rest of the metro. But I was intrigued by how low we are even compared to like a Carver or a Washington. And so just if you have any thoughts on that, if anyone has any, I don't know if that's you, Alan, or Brad has ideas on what that's about.
I would think, again, this was something we're measuring to trying to find out, where is public transit in compared to the jobs.
Jobs, yeah, I get it.
And naturally, you are seeing more services in Shakopee, Prior Lake, and Savage as far as transportation than you see outside of that. But that's also where most of the jobs are.
Right.
So the question becomes, is there housing even available where those pockets are?
Okay.
So there's many factors in this. Are they able to buy housing so they can walk to transit and so forth? Even Marshall Road Transit Station is fairly new, just a few years old. So that is a brand new piece, and even park and rides for the county overall are fairly new.
Okay.
So
it would even look that much different than like a Carver? Because it's even, I mean, it's a quarter of what Carver County was. I can read that right.
Is Carver County a little bit more condensed in terms of their business, and I guess that's kind of building up to what you're asking.
Right.
Because I know that they were 1 in 40, I don't know if they're still 1 in 40 outside of like the cities, the incorporated cities, but is it because the job base is kind of concentrated?
I think, within Chanhassen and Chaska, you have more concentrated areas of employment, and I think there's also then transit services to those employment areas.
Okay.
More than what we're seeing right now in Scott County. And of course, there's a lot of discussion to bring more transit opportunities down to Shakopee, Prior Lake, and Savage. So I think that's where you see the difference in the numbers. You may have a little bit more higher density housing too, next to some of those areas of employment where you're within 30 minutes of walking. And we just haven't seen that type of density yet down here in Scott County.
I'm going to jump in from the audience. One thing that's really different about Scott County compared to the other counties is the fact that our employment areas are pretty condensed, and like Valley Green, the area all to the pretty much north of 169 and east of 83, there is virtually no housing in that area, but those are where high concentrations of employment are in the county. So we don't have as much connection with the walking as some of the other communities. If you look at Carver County, they do have a couple of developments like Jonathan, where they integrated some employment with housing. And I think that's why you see that greater disparity with Scott County.
So Craig, 36. So this is your update, I'm assuming, to the comp plan. It shows pretty much on the county highway system, I'm assuming with your anticipated investments, the board is making fairly good congested condition then moving forward towards 2040?
Yep, it addresses, we're looking at our tip, it addresses the projects in our tip, like 42 between 17 and 83. So if that wasn't in there, that would show up as congested. The portion of 16 that we talked about here was saying was east of 18 to 13. That's right now shown as red. But with our project planned and upcoming tip, that would go away. So that's a new project in the upcoming tip for next year. And so it really leaves some spot improvements, and then we all know 42 is congested. So I think that's probably the focus for the county roads for improvements to address the congestion.
From an expansion standpoint?
From an expansion, yep. And the rest of the issues are on the state highway system.
Thanks.
I think it's a really powerful map when we talk to the cities and to the townships of where we're investing our transportation dollars in the future and how really they're targeted at alleviating congestion. And the sales tax is really targeting some of those state highway improvements. I think that's a powerful message of just, where our focus is here in the county.
Other questions?
Can I just, I'm certainly going to give people the opportunity to not answer this question, but in the cover information on page 7, there's a description about funding reductions to SmartLink, and the reductions with it in 2022, and also some of the fare repayment to Metro Council. And so I wonder if any of you could just speak to what's your process for sort of thinking through opportunities on that going forward? That seemed like a big thing when I looked at 160,000 rides or something a year. It just seemed.
Correct. So basically the Met Council, we've gone through a fare increase as of October 2016.
Okay.
At that same time, they also took a different look at contracted revenue. So basically, we had a contract with a entity. They were allowing us to keep that contracted money. But with that fare increase in 16, when they became much more difficult for them to meet budget,
Yep.
They looked at that revenue in a different way and said, no, that's actually a fare. You'll need to repay that back. So we went through a process basically of saying, okay, can you give us a 4-year process basically to increment that and not affect our budget as bad as it could be,
Yes.
asking for it right off the bat. So we went through that whole process, and again, through 2020, we'll be at that point. In the meantime, though, we then also applied for some grants and were awarded two significant grants to basically kind of
Oh.
help in that process, and it has mitigated those things at some point. But again, it is a process that we'll have to encounter as that 2020 approaches. So
But you already have some options that are going to offset some of that loss.
that is correct.
Nice, thanks.
Any else from the panel?
I'm just shaking my head that all they had to do is redefine that, and that just moved it from one part of the ledger to the other.
The audience, any questions? Wow, what a quiet group. So I wanted to say thanks. You said Judith and I pushed you a few years ago, and we did. We talked with you and Lisa and leadership out there, and we kind of settled on that safety, mobility, economic development, and how that supported safe, healthy, and livable, which you did. And when you take a look at those things on page 23, and the crash rate's down by 80 to 100, page 36, Craig just talked about, there's limited congestion on the county road system by 2040 based on the investments of the board and the cities. And 15 years of that isn't even programmed out. And then you take a look at how the investments made off of 169 and 35, and your increase to your 10-ton has gone from 78 to 91% supporting economic development. And Gary hit on that earlier about the job creation and things. It sure seems like your big indicators, the board, and you're moving in the right direction. And then you hit on, I thought, one other thing that, the original question was about political will, and I've been thinking since the 41 ribbon cutting the other day about TED and a couple corridor studies that we talked about. And we talk about focus and staying in one area and working politically together to talk about 169 and 13, and that group and scale really made that decision. Since 2002, you've removed 8 signals off of Highway 169 that weren't really funded. I think only Anderson Lakes or one of them was. 2 overpasses have gone in through the county support or with city support at 13 and 41, but 3 of them at 494, Pioneer Trail, Anderson Lake, 69, 41, and Belle Plaine. And in 2002, none of those were funded or had a means of getting done, but through partnerships with MnDOT, through scale, the wheelage tax, the sales tax, you've leveraged tens of millions of dollars of money that came in to help those highways. And then when you take a look at 13 that started as a river, rail, and road with really no projects, but a corridor, again, sitting there in about 2003, there's been a frontage road project, 13 and 5, 13 and 101, a second frontage road project to help set up 13 in Dakota, and literally you have Chowan Avenue sitting there as the only project left in that corridor study. So when there is a vision and a will and a willingness to work together, when you look at these accomplishments in the last 16 years, I think it's pretty amazing what the board and the community have accomplished. And so your guys' vision and willing, and I know at times things come up and they get combative, but when you think of the majority of these things that have moved, and they move through so smoothly and so well, you should just be commended for the work you do on your planning and your implementation and the things that the board, through their willingness to fund them and your efforts, I think have gotten done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. See, transportation is our favorite thing.
Yep. And I will add that when I grew up, I don't think there was any stoplights on 169 going through, and they just all popped up and they started disappearing. So I don't know if anyone remembers that, but that's true. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Ulrich.
Tony, I'm thinking about the, and maybe all of you, I'm thinking of the political questions, the political problems, elected, things that are thwarting goals or creating problems and so forth. And it's been mentioned here that scale has improved the environment in which we're all working over time. But I would say transportation is an area where there can be conflict and can be debate and discussion and tension and so forth. And I'm not sure it's always electeds where the problem lies or where the debate is or whatever's going on. I'm not sure it's always elected. Sometimes I think we've had some problems where engineers are saying things to their electeds that are stirring things up, and sometimes engineers don't seem to be on the same page with each other from county to city or city to city, and I'm hoping that you as engineers have a standing, I would hope monthly meeting, really. Maybe you already do, but I know police chiefs have regular meetings, and I know administrators have meetings, and mayors have meetings to build relationships so there's like no surprises, you know, because we hear surprises even coming from the staff of a city would say, well, we didn't know, and it's, how could you not know? I mean, you know, that's happened over the last 6 months, I would think, you know. So I guess I'm thinking if you don't have a regular standing, to build relationship, just to check in with each other, I'd encourage that. Do you have that kind of thing already going?
Yeah, we do, a little bit intermittent with some more than others. But yeah, those lines of communication need to be open to move forward. So we've got a few outstanding, our global maintenance agreement, for example, has been out there for quite a while, and we started that up again earlier this spring and didn't quite finalize it yet, but it's, activities like that we need to keep moving forward as our, engineering group is, staff level group.
And then obviously, when you have those meetings, then we have a transportation committee here, you'd bring back any points of debate or tension or concern, and so we would know, or you bring it to Gary, or, I just think we need to make sure all the communication is open, Because I think we all want to, we don't want to get in your way, as electeds. Right?
Probably right. Gary has a question.
I wanted to make it's not as much a question as it is both an observation and a comment. And so I'd like to draw our attention back to the slide that shows the crash rate and the severity rate on 79 in Beerling with the mini roundabout. My observation, Tony, is, and I don't disagree, that quite often when I have seen, and this is more anecdotally than statistically, but when I've seen a roundabout used to improve mobility, I think that you have sometimes seen, I think the big one you're talking about in Lakeville, they took stoplights out and put in that large roundabout. You do see for a period of time the crash rate go up. I've generally not seen the severity rate grow up a lot in those. I've actually seen that stay the same or go down usually. And generally within 18 to 24 months, it seems like then they both start going down. Where I've seen roundabouts used to improve safety, and I think that your slide on County Road 2 and 13 clearly showed that where to use safety, they almost immediately impact in a positive way. So that went from a 1.9 crash rate to a 0.4 crash rate the very next year, even though you are introducing, and that was the first roundabout in this area. And the severity went from 3.4 down to 1.1. And they stayed low because it was put there. The one at Beerling was put in for mobility, and so my observation is that I'm not sure how much longer we should wait to say that was a failed experiment, because the crash rate went from 0.26 to 1.5, and 3 years later it's a 2.43, which is a 9-fold increase in the crash rate. But in addition to which, the severity went from 0.52 to 1.84 the next year, and now it's at 3.78, so which is a 7-fold increase. So 3 years later, it's not only still significantly higher crash rates, but higher crash severities. And so maybe it is time to take a look at that again and say, this isn't working, because generally after 3 years, you would think that that would start to go down, that even if the rate stayed high, the severity would go down, and it may just be that it's really too much like a regular intersection, just rather than going straight through, you're doing a circle, and it's really just become an uncontrolled intersection as opposed to the roundabout really providing some sort of actual control in those closed spaces. So both an observation and a comment that maybe we should take a more serious look at that intersection, because I see the crash rates on roads and intersections all the time, and that is particularly high. So.
I guess I just wanted to add one thing, is that the crash, how they collected it, or the database has changed as well. So I know MnDOT, I guess they've been going over their crashes just to verify that those were actually the crashes that were happening. Because I think they've had some, I think the same people that were doing the crash stuff were the MnLARS folks as well, so.
Hope they weren't doing the stuff.
So they have, they do have some, they have, and we'll hear that through the safety plan coming up in the next few months, is that, there's some crash differences there with the crash rates, so.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, very good, thank you very
Thank you.
much.